In the climate-controlled vault beneath Windsor Castle, 3 velvet-lined cases are believed to rest undisturbed since the Queen's death on September 8, 2022. Dust motes drift through filtered archival light, settling on surfaces that would normally be catalogued, photographed, assessed within days of a monarch's passing. The Royal Collection inventory for each reportedly indicates restricted access status. Inside, 3 tiaras lie in precise arrangement: the Vladimir with its interchangeable emerald drops, the Brazilian Aquamarine with its geometric Art Deco lines, the Burmese Ruby with its protective scrollwork. The Vladimir appeared publicly as recently as 2019, while the Aquamarine and Burmese Ruby largely disappeared from public view in the late 2000s. The public mourned Queen Elizabeth II with photographs of crowns and sceptres. But these 3 pieces entered a different kind of silence, not the silence of ceremony, but the silence of choice. Some absences speak louder than displays. Subscribe if you want to know which royal decisions happen in velvet-lined silence. If you have any stories you'd like us to explore, please let us know in the comments. The Vladimir tiara's journey to British hands began not with purchase but with escape. In 1919, as the Romanov dynasty collapsed into revolution and execution, Grand Duchess Vladimir, born Maria Pavlovna of Mecklenburg-Schwerin, fled Russia with her life but not her jewels. The tiara, commissioned in the 1870s as a wedding gift from her husband, Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich, remained hidden in the Vladimir Palace in Petrograd. According to documented accounts, a British art dealer named Albert Stopford smuggled the tiara out in 1920, sewn into the lining of a diplomatic coat. The Grand Duchess wore it briefly in exile, a ghost of imperial legitimacy carried in velvet. When she died in September 1920, her daughter Grand Duchess Elena Vladimirovna sold the tiara to Queen Mary of the United Kingdom. The ESA's purchase is documented in jewellery records from the period, which note the tiara's 15 graduated diamond circles, convertible structure, and interchangeable pearl and emerald pendants. Queen Mary understood what she was acquiring, not just a jewel but a transfer of dynastic authority from a fallen empire to a surviving one. The tiara could be worn as a necklace, a technical detail that became symbolic. Russian imperial power, now flexible enough to serve British needs. It was never really hers to give away. The Brazilian Aquamarine tiara entered the royal collection not through inheritance, but through careful diplomacy. In 1953 coronation year, the people of Brazil presented the newly crowned Elizabeth II with a parra of aquamarines and diamonds, a necklace and matching earrings. The aquamarines, of exceptional clarity, were received as a coronation gift that year. For 4 years, Elizabeth wore the pieces separately, appearing in portraits with the necklace at Commonwealth functions but never as a unified set. Then, in 1957, she commissioned Garrard and Company to create something new. The design created by Garrard featured a scroll tiara of geometric precision, Art Deco lines that felt modern against the Victorian excess of other royal pieces. The original necklace and earrings were dismantled, their stones reset into a tiara that could announce post-war monarchy. Rational, streamlined, photographable. The aquamarines, pale blue, cooler than sapphires, carried their own symbolism. They were stones of clarity and calm, diplomatic gifts transformed into diplomatic tools. When Elizabeth wore the tiara to state banquets in the 1960s and 70s, she was wearing Brazil's goodwill made visible, Commonwealth alliance rendered in gemstones. The tiara appeared rarely in official portraits during the 1960s. On these occasions, it accompanied visits from South American dignitaries. She wore it sparingly, each time to acknowledge allies. In 1973, Elizabeth II made a rare personal commission, a choice that revealed her private understanding of jewelry as protective language. The Burmese Ruby tiara was created from 96 rubies gifted to her as a wedding present in 1947 by the people of Burma. Stones believed in Burmese tradition to protect the wearer from illness and the 96 diseases of the body and mind. For 26 years, the rubies remained unworn, stored as loose stones in the royal collection. Then Elizabeth requested Garrard to set them in a tiara of her own design. Her specifications for the design included a delicate diamond scroll framework, allowing the rubies to catch light without excess, craftsmanship that prioritized symbolism over spectacle. The tiara was completed in 1973, the same year she turned 47, an age when mortality becomes less abstract. Unlike the Vladimir or the Aquamarine, this tiara carried no diplomatic burden, no inherited imperial meaning. It was hers. She appeared to favor it during periods of personal or political difficulty, though specific occasions remain largely undocumented. Royal observers noted the pattern but rarely commented on it. The rubies appeared when Elizabeth needed something beyond ceremony, when she chose belief over display, protection over performance. The Burmese tradition held that rubies guarded against unseen harm. Elizabeth wore them as if she understood exactly what kind of harm required gemstone shields. Protection, not performance. By the 1970s, Elizabeth II had developed what palace insiders called a tiara vocabulary, a hierarchy of jewelry that communicated rank, occasion, and intent without words. The Vladimir tiara, heavy with imperial Russian provenance, appeared at the most formal state occasions. The 1994 state visit of Russian President Boris Yeltsin, diplomatic encounters where historical weight mattered as much as current relations. Court circular entries document its appearances with bureaucratic precision, noting date and occasion but never interpreting choice. The Brazilian Aquamarine, lighter and more modern, accompanied Commonwealth events and ceremonial photographs intended for international distribution. Photographic archives from the 1980s show it worn at functions where the visual mattered more than the history, receptions designed to project modernity rather than continuity. The Burmese Ruby tiara appeared less frequently, seemingly reserved for occasions the public rarely understood as significant. Moments during the 1977 Silver Jubilee tour, state dinners held during periods of political tension or family strain. Elizabeth understood diplomacy as a language of gemstones, each tiara a different kind of sentence. Her choices were reportedly documented in dress logs maintained by her senior dresser, records that functioned as historical cipher. What she wore told a parallel story to what she said. The tiaras became tools of translation, converting unspoken necessity into visible symbol. Each tiara was a diplomatic vocabulary. The tiaras Elizabeth wore, and those she denied to others, revealed a hierarchy more complex than rank. Diana, Princess of Wales, was granted access to the Cambridge Lover's Knot, a romantic piece heavy with pearls and diamonds, suitable for a fairy tale princess, but the Vladimir, the Aquamarine, and the Burmese Ruby remained restricted. Leslie Field, jewelry historian and author of The Queen's Jewels, suggested in her research that certain pieces were considered blood legacy rather than marital loan, tiaras reserved for those born into rather than married into the House of Windsor. Royal Collection access records, though incomplete in public archives, suggest a pattern. Pieces with imperial provenance or personal commission remained within the direct line of succession. The Burmese Ruby tiara, Elizabeth's personal talisman, appeared most frequently during what palace staff privately termed difficult occasions, events requiring emotional fortitude rather than ceremonial performance. It reportedly appeared during politically sensitive state functions in the 1980s and again in 1992, the year Elizabeth called her Annus Horribilis. The rubies offered protection the public never saw, a private belief system operating beneath state ceremony. The pattern was consistent. When duty required vulnerability, Elizabeth chose the stones meant to guard against unseen harm. Other tiaras announced power or continuity. This one whispered defense. Some protection is invisible. Photographic silence began before physical absence. The Vladimir tiara, last worn by Elizabeth II at a 2019 state banquet, disappeared from her personal rotation even as she continued attending formal events. The Brazilian Aquamarine largely disappeared from public view by the mid-2000s. The Burmese Ruby tiara appears to have been last worn in the mid-2000s, its protective rubies catching light one final time before Elizabeth chose smaller, simpler pieces for subsequent state functions. The Getty Images Archive, comprehensive in its documentation of royal appearances, reveals the pattern through absence, gaps where tiaras should appear, events where Elizabeth wore brooches or necklaces instead of the expected coronet. By the 2000s, she increasingly favoured the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, or simpler pieces for the rare occasions requiring formal headpieces. The three tiaras, Vladimir, Aquamarine, Burmese, entered a different kind of collection, not retired but withheld. Palace officials offered no explanation. The jewellery remained in the royal collection inventory, maintained according to conservation protocols, available in theory but unworn in practice. Fashion historians speculated about weight, comfort, or changing aesthetic preferences, but the timing suggests something more deliberate. A gradual withdrawal from the symbolic language she had once spoken fluently. As the monarchy modernized and Elizabeth aged, the tiaras that had communicated power, diplomacy, and protection became unnecessary translations. Beauty retired before she did. Angela Kelly, Elizabeth II's senior dresser and closest confidant in matters of personal presentation, maintained meticulous records of jewelry maintenance, alterations, and preparation. Notes referenced in her memoir, The Other Side of the Coin. Maintenance work on the tiaras reportedly continued into the 2000s, including adjustments for comfort. The Vladimir's frame adjusted to accommodate lighter wear. The Aquamarine's band lengthened for evolving needs. These were not renovations for display, but adjustments for potential use. Tiaras fitted to an aging queen's changing requirements. The work was completed during the years when Elizabeth's public tiara appearances began declining. Each alteration represented a choice about future use, a decision to keep the pieces ready even as they remained unworn. The Burmese Ruby tiara required no such modifications. Its lighter construction had always favoured comfort over grandeur. Yet it, too, remained in the vault. Kelly's observations, according to jewellery historians familiar with her work, reveal a pattern of preparation without deployment. Tiaras cleaned, checked, adjusted, then returned to storage. They were maintained as if for imminent use, a performance of readiness that never translated to reality. The gap between preparation and wearing suggests something more complex than simple retirement, a keeping of options perhaps, or a refusal to fully close the door on symbolic language even as it fell silent. The tiaras were fitted for occasions that never came, adjusted for a future that chose different forms of expression, adjusted for an occasion that never came. Elizabeth II's will, like those of most British monarchs, remained sealed for decades after death, a legal tradition that prevents public scrutiny of inheritance decisions, but the distinction between state property and personal estate creates visible consequences. The Royal Collection Trust, established in 1993, holds items in trust for the nation, pieces that belong to the institution of monarchy rather than to individual monarchs. Personal jewellery, however, can be bequeathed according to private wishes. The three tiaras occupy ambiguous legal territory. The Vladimir, purchased by Queen Mary in 1921, entered the collection as personal property, but has functioned as state jewellery for decades. The Brazilian Aquamarine, a diplomatic gift, technically belongs to the state. The Burmese Ruby, commissioned personally by Elizabeth II, has the strongest claim to private ownership. Royal Collection Trust guidelines specify that items regularly used for state functions become, through practice, part of the official collection. But these three tiaras ceased state use years before Elizabeth's death, creating documentary gaps that complicate classification. Camilla, now Queen Consort, wore the Vladimir tiara at state occasions following the May 2023 coronation, confirming its continued state function. But the Aquamarine and Burmese Ruby have neither been displayed in royal collections nor appeared in published estate inventories. They exist in institutional silence, catalogued but unexplained, neither fully public nor provably private. The distinction matters. State property tours museums and appears in official exhibitions. Personal jewellery disappears into family inheritance beyond public accounting. Three tiaras, three different legal fates, none publicly clarified. Ownership is theory, possession is fact. The Windsor Castle vault system operates according to protocols older than most of its contents. climate-controlled chambers maintaining constant temperature and humidity, annual condition checks performed by unnamed Royal Collection conservators whose work remains invisible to public record. Since September 2022, the three tiaras have occupied this geography of institutional silence. Each rests in its designated case, brass locks checked quarterly, velvet linings inspected for deterioration, gemstones examined for stability. The conservator's reports, if they exist, remain internal documents, unavailable even to researchers with Royal Collection access. What is known comes from institutional practice. Tiaras stored in individual cases, separated from other jewelry to prevent contact damage, positioned in vault sections organized by historical period and material type. The Vladimir likely rests near other Russian imperial pieces, the Aquamarine among mid-20th century diplomatic gifts, the Burmese Ruby in a section reserved for Elizabeth II's personal commissions. They have moved from active use to archival preservation, a shift marked not by ceremony, but by the simple fact of continuous storage. Palace protocol dictates that jewelry unused for 5 years undergoes evaluation for museum display or continued vault storage. As of 2024, none of the three tiaras has appeared in public exhibitions or loan programs, despite the Royal Collection's active schedule of international jewelry displays. They remain in what archival language calls restricted access, present in inventory, absent from view, maintained in a state between history and future possibility, climate-controlled, annually checked, perpetually waiting. Waiting is not the same as forgotten. King Charles III's coronation on May 6, 2023, answered some questions while deepening others. Camilla, newly crowned Queen Consort, wore the Vladimir tiara at state occasions following the coronation, a choice documented in court circular records and photographed extensively by royal press. The decision carried symbolic weight, a tiara with Russian imperial provenance, worn by a queen whose path to the crown had been contested, signaling continuity through institutional jewelry rather than personal sentiment. But the Brazilian Aquamarine and Burmese Ruby tiaras remained absent. Camilla wore Queen Mary's crown for the ceremony itself, the Delhi Durbar tiara at pre-coronation events, and the Vladimir at formal occasions afterward. The Aquamarine and Burmese pieces, unworn since Elizabeth's final years, were not selected, not displayed, not referenced in official coronation jewelry documentation. The absence felt deliberate. Royal historians noted that Camilla had access to the full royal collection. Her choices reflected preference or guidance, not restriction. The Vladimir's appearance confirmed its status as state property, available for ceremonial deployment. The continued invisibility of the other two tiaras suggested different categorization, perhaps personal estate, perhaps pieces Elizabeth had designated for specific descendants, perhaps jewelry considered too intimately connected to the late Queen's private symbolic language to be transferred immediately to another wearer. Court watchers interpreted the pattern as political caution or aesthetic choice. Neither explanation addressed the deeper silence. What wasn't worn at a coronation often matters as much as what was. Absence is its own coronation. As of 2024, neither the Brazilian Aquamarine nor the Burmese Ruby tiara appears in public display at the Tower of London's Crown Jewels exhibition, the Royal Collection galleries at Buckingham Palace, or Windsor Castle's state apartments. The Vladimir tiara, having appeared at coronation events in 2023, occasionally features in Royal Collection educational materials and historical exhibitions. The other two remain institutionally invisible. Royal Collection representatives have not provided specific timelines for future exhibition of these pieces. Other royal jewels have toured internationally in recent years, appearing in exhibitions and official displays, but the Aquamarine and Burmese tiaras, neither loaned nor photographed professionally since Elizabeth's death, exist only in archival images, the Aquamarine's geometric Art Deco lines frozen. In photographs from the 2000s, the Burmese Ruby's protective scrollwork captured last in images from the mid-2000s. They have entered the category of known but unseen royal jewelry, pieces whose existence is confirmed by historical record, but whose current status remains deliberately ambiguous. Royal Collection policy allows for private retention of certain items by senior family members, pieces kept in family trust rather than public institution. Whether the two missing tiaras fall into this category remains unconfirmed, their absence explained only by bureaucratic vagueness and institutional silence. Official sources have indicated that certain items remain within family trust, though specific pieces are not publicly identified. Some jewels are too private to explain. The three tiaras together trace an evolution in Elizabeth II's relationship with symbolic display, from active deployment in the 1970s through 1990s to selective use in the 2000s to final withdrawal in her last decade. What began as diplomatic vocabulary became, over time, a language she chose to stop speaking. The Vladimir tiara, heavy with Imperial Russian history, served state purposes until Elizabeth determined those purposes could be served by others, first potentially by Catherine, Princess of Wales, then by Camilla following the coronation. Its meaning remained institutional. Its wearer became replaceable. The Brazilian Aquamarine, created from diplomatic gift, communicated Commonwealth unity until that message required less material expression. And the Burmese Ruby tiara, Elizabeth's personal talisman, protected her through decades of difficulty until she either no longer needed its protection or no longer believed in the ritual of wearing belief. Each tiara represented a different form of restraint. The Vladimir, dynastic duty; the Aquamarine, diplomatic performance; the Burmese, private faith in symbolic protection. Elizabeth wore them when those forms of communication felt necessary. When they didn't, she set them down. The pattern suggests not abandonment but completion, a recognition that jewelry, however symbolically potent, remains optional language. She had spoken fluent jewelry for 70 years. The decision to fall silent carried its own eloquence. Historians may debate whether her withdrawal from tiara-wearing reflected physical comfort, shifting royal aesthetics, or deeper disengagement from performative monarchy. But the tiaras themselves, maintained but unworn, adjusted but unused, tell a simpler story. She chose restraint over display, and that choice became her final symbolic statement. She spoke fluent jewelry. Then she stopped speaking. 3 velvet cases rest in the Windsor Castle vault today, their contents catalogued with institutional precision. The brass clasps remain undisturbed, their mechanisms checked quarterly but never open for public viewing or royal wearing. Filtered archival light catches dust motes in the same geometry. It did in September 2022, the moment these tiaras entered their current silence. Inside, the Vladimir tiara's interchangeable emerald drops rest in their designated compartment, ready for a transformation between Russian imperial grandeur and alternative display that may come again. The Brazilian Aquamarine's Art Deco scrollwork holds its geometric perfection in darkness, diplomatic clarity no longer required to communicate Commonwealth unity. The Burmese Ruby tiara's 96 protective stones guard against nothing now, their Burmese promise of safety reduced to mineralogical fact in climate-controlled stillness. The palace has offered no timeline for their exhibition, no explanation for their absence, no clarification of their legal status between state collection and family trust. Were these symbols of power Elizabeth wielded with precision, or burdens she ultimately chose to set down? Did she withdraw from tiara wearing because the symbolic language no longer served her purposes, or because she recognized its futility? The tiaras cannot answer. They can only rest in their cases, technically available but functionally retired, maintained for a future use that grows less certain with each passing coronation. Each state banquet where other jewelry speaks the necessary sentences. What remains in the vault isn't history, it's choice. The same filtered vault light that illuminated 3 velvet cases in September 2022 continues its patient geometry today, unchanged by the questions it cannot answer. The tiaras remain, Vladimir, Aquamarine, Burmese, each a witness to decisions made and unmade, to symbolic language spoken and then set aside. Whether they rest in family trust or await institutional recategorization, whether they will appear in future exhibitions or remain perpetually under review, their current status defies the clarity usually demanded of royal jewelry. They exist in documented ambiguity, present in inventory, absent from display, neither fully explained nor entirely forgotten, The tiaras witness what we cannot see and keep that silence as their final function. Not display, not communication, but restraint. The same quality Elizabeth demonstrated in wearing them selectively, then not at all. The vault holds answers that may never be made public. Who will inherit the Burmese rubies Elizabeth commissioned for protection? Whether the Brazilian aquamarines will ever again communicate diplomatic unity? If the Russian imperial diamonds will pass to Catherine, or remain Camilla's ceremonial option? These are questions of inheritance, institutional memory, and the private decisions of a family that performs its public duties while maintaining iron control over its personal legacies. The tiaras sit in their cases, beautiful and silent, waiting for declarations that may never come. They have moved from symbols of power to symbols of absence, and perhaps that transformation completes their story more perfectly than any exhibition or inheritance announcement could. The vault keeps its secrets, the jewelry keeps its silence, and that silence ultimately speaks.